When you learn economic and you heard the word poverty, it is not that people don't have money. What it actually means is that people cannot access to food, shelter, health, and education, the daily essential needs of a society or a country. So there are countries that exist like that, where there's lots of natural resources, lots of gold or oil, but their people cannot have access to the higher utilities of their daily essentials like food, shelter, health, and education. So think of like Venezuela. Venezuela has the most reserved of oil in the world. But Venezuela, compared to the US, they are not as rich as the US, right? Not only that they have lots of resources, but the people cannot access food, shelter, education, and financial. So that means poverty, okay? Not just money itself. Okay, so in this chapter, you are going to learn four things, okay? You have to be able to differentiate between absolute poverty and relative poverty. There are two types, okay? Not just one. So we have to differentiate them. And then we have to find the causes behind the poverty. Why can't people access to health, food, shelter, and education? And then you're going to learn about how government can come in and help with that. How can they remove the poverty from the country? Earlier, when I asked you about what is poverty, you answered people lack the access to the basic needs. So that is absolute need. So the first part of this chapter, they introduced the concept of relative poverty. This often happens in the US or in developed countries where, have you ever heard the term the rich got richer and the poor got poorer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what it means is it's not like they have more money, but it's just like they own more things or they have access to way better education. Think of Bill Gates' sons can go to Harvard easily, where regular people like doctors with their kid study so hard, so amazing, cannot get to Harvard. And that's relative poverty. Here's the data that I want to show you. So this is like a representation of relative poverty. Okay, so when you see this graph, this is what happened. The yellow line is representing the top 5%. So the top 5% richest people in the US. So the US has around 300 million people. Okay. 5% of 300 million is 1.5 million people. So from 1962 to 2016, the 1.5 million groups of people in the US, they continue to own more, think of like more land or more business, more resources. So 1962, they owned 54% of the resources. In 2016, they own 66% of the resources. School, hospitals, buildings, houses, that's how much they earn more or own more. But look at the bottom 90%. 90% of 300 million is 270 million, okay? The 270 million people in the US from 1962, their ownership of the resources in the US becomes less. So the mismatch is called the relative poverty. And people are not happy. The government isn't happy either. Relative poverty also happens in rich countries too. Now we're going to get into the causes behind those poverty. Okay. The first cause is that there's unemployment. So when people are being unemployed, that means that they don't have the earnings in order to pay for the living or pay for their daily essential needs. And since they cannot do that, they have no chance to get access to those essentials, right? Food, shelter, financial education. And the second cause is low paid jobs. Now, that's when they don't have a job and they don't have steady income. Different from unemployment, because if you don't have a job, like there's no way you can even pay for your food if you're unemployed. But low paid is causing another issue is that you cannot save and invest. Like you cannot buy land or house for the future, right? You keep having that low paid job. This is what I put. Unemployment, no paid, no spending. Low paid, give you no saving, prevents you from investing for the future. Now, let's come to illness and old age. Okay, countries like with people who get sick very often and who is getting old and stop working, right? Or they like to retire, also lead to poverty. Yeah, like I'm talking about a country, people are getting very sick often. So that's one of the issue there. Now, there are some exceptions, right? There are some exceptions where countries getting old, but they still have an income. Like Japan. Japan is the developed country, but they are facing an issue of the population is getting really old, right? Japan has the world's oldest population, okay? Significant of people age 65 and over. I think 29% of them in 2022. It's increasing every year. But Japan is an exception because they have technology. Robots come in and they make McDonald's, they make food for them. They don't have to hire people to go to work. So then they can use this retirement saving to spend for those food and services. So yeah, there are some exceptions, but this is like in theory, like illness and old age can also be a problem. And then there's the last one, which is a long one. They call it vicious circle of poverty. Okay. Poor individuals have limited access to education and healthcare, which you mentioned earlier, which reduce the employment prospect. Okay. Second one, and keeping them trapped in poverty. So this is like it's a loop, right? You do one bad things, it leads to another bad things, it leads to another bad things, then it's all blow up. So think of I stop going to class, then it leads to I don't know what's going on, and then I start doing my homework, and then I fail my class, and then my family is angry at me. Like it leads the whole things to vicious circle of poverty is where it started with education and healthcare. It can start with other things. It's just in the textbook they talk about, okay, if I was being born and the kid has no education and he has no healthcare, so he gets sick very often. And when the kids grow up, what happened is they don't have the skill to work, right? And then they go through their life, don't know what to do, and they can never produce good services or good products. And it kept keeping them trapped. And think a million people are being like that. And now the third one is we're going to learn about how do you measure poverty. Okay, so economists like to use measurement or like to use indicator. Like some of the indicators that you learned in the past is like GDP, inflation, right? Consumer price index. Those are indicators. Last chapter, you learned about HDI, Human Development Index. In this chapter, because we learned about poverty, we're going to learn about a new indicator, which is called the Multidimensional Poverty Index. Now, you're going to see it's becoming very similar to HDI in the last chapter. Okay, but I want you to pay attention here, which will make you understand it. MPI, Multidimensional Poverty, measures poverty. Okay, it measures poverty in 3 dimensions: health, education, and standard of living. So it's very similar to HDI. If I go back to the previous chapter, you can use HDI and MPI to measure poverty, but you cannot use MPI to measure standard of living. So that's the trick there, is you can use 2 measurements to measure poverty. So if HDI is low and MPI is high, then that indicates poverty. But if you do HDI to measure poverty, it doesn't directly measuring the poverty itself. It just measures the overall standard of living. Okay, so MPI is more toward poverty. HDI is more toward the standard of living in general. Now, how do you know if a household is actually living in poverty? There's a definition right here, is a household is considered poor if it experiences deprivation or lack of at least 1/3 of these indicators. A developed country will try to have people get access to all of these. So just know that measuring poverty, you look at these 3 areas, and then at least 1/3 of these areas are not met, then you can conclude that the people are living in poverty. All right. So we just talked about those 4 areas: absolute relative poverty, causes, measuring. And then the last thing we talk about is how the government can play a role in solving these problems. In economics, we love to involve the government into the conversations because we can't leave them out. They always exist. So the government has some roles to do to help reducing poverty. So number one they can do is to train people or educate people about these things, right? Then they can improve jobs and future income or train them new skills. Okay. The government can also implement economic growth policy, such as fiscal expansion or monetary expansions. They can reduce the taxes collecting from businesses or personal income from people, or they can print money and reduce interest rate to activate economic growth. One of the government spending that they have is they can build hospital, they can build school, they can build infrastructure. That can help educate and train people more or get people to access more into those services. If they don't, then it's really hard for business or people to get access to it. Imagine like the government don't involve in building schools, right? Like governments who don't want to invest in education. Third is government can enact a minimum wage law where they can ensure that the people who are working can earn a minimum amount of money so that they can spend on their daily livings. At the same time, ensure that they can have some money left over to save and invest. And then number 4 is interesting. Encouraging multinational companies create employment opportunities. I use an example of Coca-Cola. It's a famous multinational company. So when Coke comes to a country, they often establish an infrastructure or factory within the country itself, let's say Vietnam. And then what happened is they hire people, creating more jobs and opportunity for them. At the same time, they help restaurants having a better drinks on the menu, a variety of drinks on the menu. And because of that, the restaurants can thrive, getting more people to go into the restaurants and creating economic growth in the food and beverage industry. If you go to a restaurant and they said that they don't have Coke or any Sprite or any soft drinks, you tend to weight it as less options compared to other restaurants, or you may not want to go back. So think of multinational company comes to a countries and establish more economic activities or businesses to the people there. Multinational. Now, if government can reduce poverty, then they can reduce relative poverty. If you look at this, government can reduce inequality by progressive taxations, providing benefits, offering free education and healthcare, and conduct the macroeconomic policies. So progressive taxations, what it means is like the more you earn, the more that you have to pay taxes. If you remember, I tell you like, if I make more money, the government going to ask me to pay more taxes. You make less money, you pay less tax. And the government going to take the taxes and they're going to build hospital. They are going to build infrastructure for the less wealthy group so that they can access to those services. The government can also provide benefits. So benefits mean that unemployment support. If I'm not working, the government can give me some money so that they can pay for my daily living. They can offer free education and healthcare, and they can conduct the macroeconomic policies where they can create jobs and regional development.